is Julie Ann Link, and welcome to the Music Link. This week on the Let's Link project, I'd like to welcome Dr. Eric Stomberg. Thank you so much for being here, Eric.
Thanks, Julie. It's a pleasure to join you and to see you again.
For everyone watching, Eric and I met about 15 years ago when I attended the Interlochen Advanced Bassoon Institute and then later working with the City Music Cleveland Chamber Orchestra. So Eric, just to start out, could you please share with us an overview of who you are and what you do as a professional musician?
Sure, I'm happy to, and I remember those times fondly from years ago that we first met each other.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to lead a musician life that's quite varied, and I have now taught for a few decades, both in academia and at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, and so I'm very fortunate to teach students, all the way down to age 14, up to doctoral students who are looking to gain employment in the orchestra or in the university, and so it all keeps me quite balanced, I think, professionally, to be able to work with students on both sides of the spectrum. And I kind of exhausted the chamber orchestra opportunities in the state of Ohio, first starting in the Cincinnati Chamber Orchestra when I was in school there, and then when I left, and then with the Pro Musica Chamber Orchestra in Columbus, Ohio, and then with City Music Cleveland, which is a chamber orchestra in Cleveland and the surrounding areas where we played a number of concerts together back in 2010, I think we determined. So in addition to that, I think, at this stage in my career and a lot of my colleagues, we also endeavor into service activities and kind of giving back to our profession. And so I'm kind of concluding my fourth year as the president of the International Double Reed Society, where I've been on the board for a number of years. So that all of that together, keeps me pretty busy.
Eric, could you share with us more about where you grew up?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I grew up in southern New Mexico, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and was very fortunate to be in a musical environment. My parents weren't necessarily they appreciated music, but weren't musicians themselves. But I'm the youngest of three, and at that point, when time came around in the sixth grade to choose an instrument, or if one wanted to be in the band or the orchestra or the choir, my brother is a cellist, my sister was an oboist, and so it just seemed like a normal thing. They were pulling me one into band, one into orchestra, and I narrowed it down to the bassoon and the viola, of all things. And so I remember being in the cafeteria of my grade school, and there was an instrument petting zoo there with the wind instruments, and I was, the only kid who could squawk out a sound on the bassoon. And so there it was. I was a bassoon player, and very quickly my friend, who also decided to play bassoon, quit. And so, like many young bassoon players, it was just me fighting through it all.
Yes. Playing all the euphonium parts. And
Exactly.
yeah. What did you do in marching band? Were you in band?
I was a serious marching band kid, actually. Some of my students are not into it at all. Some of them are. I was really serious about it. I marched on the drum line. I was a bass drum player, and then a snare player, and then became the drum major my last year of high school. And then I marched 1 year in college, actually, at the university.
Wonderful. Eric, could you share with us about the different schools that you studied music at and what the programs were like?
Sure. I started at the University of Kansas, where I teach now. So and it was a school at that point that was kind of perfect for me. I was a very late, even though I had played bassoon since I was 12, I wasn't what one would consider a very serious student of the instrument. I would practice. When I practiced, my mother would say, "Oh, I guess you have a lesson tomorrow." It was like
Yes.
that. And I was playing a lot of tennis and doing a lot of things, and I was very active with music, but I wasn't actually very serious with my practicing. I didn't really, things came easy to me for where I was. And so anyway, when I got to the University of Kansas, I was challenged by my teacher and by other students, and it really allowed me to grow in an environment that was supportive and allowed me to get through things. And I see that in a lot of my students here. I then went on to do my master's and doctoral degrees at the Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music with my dear mentor Bill Winstead, and that environment was more serious, than what I had in my undergraduate. And so I remember at first just being super lonely, because it wasn't the kind of environment I came from as a very social person. And so I got a cat, like right away. I got a cat because I was a cat lived 22 years. It was incredible, this kitty. Um, uh,
Wow.
but the teaching there and my relationship with Bill and all that institution, and then also the community gave me really helped to launch my career.
Mm. Could you share with us more about your teachers, Eric, and how they influenced you?
Sure. I started studying with a man named Greg Randall in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and he was the teacher of woodwind students. That's kind of he was a retired band director, and he was learning the bassoon alongside me. While he was a clarinet player when he, was still teaching before retirement, and so. But what I remember about that is he was very, very particular about um, rhythm and about pitch and about dynamics specifically. I have this Vivaldi concerto, the E minor concerto that I played when I was a kid. And when he was unhappy that I didn't play the crescendos and decrescendos that he had marked in, he got out a red pen and, kind of outlined all of them in red. And it looks like this horrific situation. But literally every square footage of that score had some direction to it,
Mhm.
to get louder, to get softer, to do this, to do that. And so I realized later that there was a lot there, from a musical standpoint. Um, at the University of Kansas, I studied with Alan Hawkins, who owned Vocal Music Company, which a lot of us might remember the yellow cover of all these editions of things. He made a lot of arrangements for bassoon ensemble, bassoon quartet. We had a bassoon quartet that met at 7:30 a.m. every Friday morning, and Alan had usually just cranked out a new quartet, that was from a Mozart, four-hand piano work or something like that, and turned into a bassoon quartet. And so from Alan, I got a lot of fundamentals. He was very big on the Giampieri book on Milda scale studies, the scale and chord studies, Opus 24, and of course all that reading of those bassoon quartets, just kind of got me going and in a more serious fashion. On the way in between my bachelor's and master's, I started attending some summer festivals, specifically Sarasota Music Festival after my freshman year, and that really changed my life. That's where I met Bill Winstead and just really started to understand what it would take to move forward, to really improve. And so yeah, my time in Cincinnati, I think, was what one would consider, finishing in a way, kind of, completing the areas that needed remediation, as it were, and then kind of, getting past the instrument and past the technique and all of that stuff, and getting back to the reason we all do this, which is to share what the composer has written with others, and to hopefully move them in, one way or another.
Hmm. Eric, are there any tips or advice that you could share with us about what you've learned about the music industry since working professionally?
Well, I think the one of the things that we all find, I think those of us who are full-time professional musicians, is that there's often other traits and skills and interests that we have kind of embedded uh, in our musical minds and our bodies, and I definitely think, now it's more important than ever that we tap into those. Mine has certainly been an interest in structure and problem solving, administratively. Those things, I didn't know I was interested in that, but had an opportunity years ago at Interlochen, actually, which kind of launched opportunities for me going forward that allowed me to find out things about myself and interests. And I think a lot of us have those things, whether they happen to do with other creative works, and whether there's composition that's somehow embedded in someone, or recording skills, or fundraising, or other things that can really help wherever you are, whatever organization you're a part of. Because I think we all have to take part, actively in what we're doing. We can't just play the bassoon or the viola or the violin and just leave the concert and go home and not engage with community and with society. It doesn't work out so well usually if we don't find those things. So I think it's not just a necessity. I think it's actually really healthy to find other things that we're interested in.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, Eric, that was something, just working in orchestras, and it's such a blessing, but also the realization of, yeah, finding different creative outlets, I think, is really important, and playing into those strengths and giving back where you can, and in different areas of different organizations. So I wanted to ask, did you ever consider changing careers outside of music, or, with these different, finding different paths and interests, and or always in that same realm of music?
Well, it's interesting. I think there are two aspects to this. One of them, probably a lot of young students have. I call it my Taco Bell moment, and I've told this
Okay.
to my students, that after one particularly treacherous and terrible lesson, I thought, this is not working well, right? Like, and I wound up wallowing in my sorrow at a Taco Bell, and in Cincinnati, and I thought, this might be it. This might be all she wrote. I can't seem to figure out how to, like, get it going. Like, to do all of the things that I'm needing to do. And I realized at that point, I was there with a friend, and realized that I just hadn't actually found the right gear or the right tools, maybe both of those things. And so I, dug deeper and figured out how to get myself to get back to work and not worry so much about the outside evaluation. In a way, there was that, and at different points in their careers. And I certainly, my interests in opportunities in administrative work have provided some different interesting scenarios that I've certainly thought about. But I think having a diversification of work is never a bad thing. So I'm cool with where things are, now. So I'm going to hang out here for a while.
Eric, could you share with us about your teaching career?
Sure. I think back on it, and
Mm.
I was, like a lot of uh, young students, helping others. Like, even when I was in high school or junior high, I was like the kid who would help somebody out with, you know, after school or with learning fingerings or things like that. And I always enjoyed that. I never really thought about it. I often, I think most people who go into a performance career or start into performance degrees, most people are not doing that to prepare themselves to teach.
Mm.
I find that in my students too, and I think I wasn't any different. I mean, my intent was, and I did a lot of audition taking and things of that nature, and it was actually right after I had uh, come back from an audition in Boston, and there were some teaching opportunities, and I thought, oh, this is interesting, you know. And so that's kind of where all of that started a long time ago, right before the clock ticked 2000, you know, is when I started teaching. So um, uh, yeah, so I think um, the the career that I've had has found me, and I think they often do. I think we're very fortunate to, you know, often wind up in the place we're supposed to be, and I've just been so lucky to have really hardworking and generous and kind students. You know, a teacher is really only as good as their students, or a coach is only as good as their players. I mean, that's the way it is, and so yes, we can improve things and give solutions. But obviously, the students are the ones who have to do the work. And so, any accolades that a teacher receives are really things that should be first delivered to the students who did the work. You know, and so I'm very fortunate to have, you know, in these few decades had a lot of very fine students who've worked tremendously hard and who've achieved some great things, and that just makes me so proud.
Could you share with us a bit more about your teaching philosophies and just your approach to teaching music and the bassoon?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think the most important thing, and I, again, I'm sure a lot of folks say this, but my philosophy is really about becoming the best musician that we can become, or that a student can become. That's like the number one goal. The word bassoon is not in there. Like, my assumption is that if people try hard enough and work hard enough, they can play the bassoon. Like, they can figure out how to play the bassoon. Obviously, there's some, you know, talent involved with that, and somebody's, you know, aptitude to take to a certain instrument versus another instrument is important. But you know, turning a phrase on the bassoon or the violin or the cello or the piano is, you know, it involves the same kinds of things, right? I mean, it involves an understanding of musical style, of intent, of the composer's uh, uh, will, you know, like what is in there, and so I think actually it's really important for students to study music outside of their own specific repertoire. And for me, it was I still remember this. It was a Schubert piano trio at the Sarasota Music Festival that I heard that absolutely blew my mind away, and I forever fell in love with the piano trio as a genre. And probably when people owned CDs, you know, had as many CDs of piano trios as I did anything else, including bassoon recordings. And so you know, my brother is a cellist as well, and so I um, obviously have some interest in that repertoire and in his work, and there's something just really important in one's philosophy of kind of understanding where the musical line can be attained and how one works towards that. And I think, you know, you could ask my students on your next shows, but I think the you know, one of the most important things is to transcend the instrument. And I know, I had a lot of conversations with Bill Winstead about this. We, were close when I was his student. We had a very close relationship, I think. And after I graduated there, we really, I just learned so much, from him, not just the bassoon, but life and music making. And I think he would say sometimes he just happened to have a bassoon in his hand. He played all these instruments, including the harp and piano, um, and it didn't really matter what was in his hand. The idea of making music and collaborating and saying something as a musician artist was the most important thing. And so I guess behind all of my philosophy, sure, there's like specific things that one has to do with technique and articulation and all of those building blocks and foundational aspects of music. But turning a phrase and making somebody feel something is super, like, it's the most important thing, right? So we have to always keep that in mind. And I hope that my students would approve of that
Hmm.
that way of describing it.
Eric, could you share with us more about your bassoon quartet, Men That Don't Bite? It would be great to hear about how y'all started and the concerts that you did around the local community.
Yeah, well, it's you know, a super fun time in my life, I would say, when we created this thing. So the impetus was actually around my research that I did for my doctorate. And so this was research on the composer and bassoonist Victor Bruns, who was a German bassoonist, at that time an East German bassoonist, but had a very interesting background. He was in the quartet that premiered Prokofiev's humorous scherzo, the first bassoon quartet kind of that we think about in that way. I guess there were others before, but and so I became interested in his music when I was in a lesson in my doctoral studies, and Bill Winstead said, "Well, have you looked at this piece, or do you know anything about this composer?" And threw this thing on the stand, and I thought, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." Anyway, it turns out that Victor composed an incredible amount of music, including 3 quartets for 3 bassoons and contrabassoon. And so when I was teaching, I had already moved from Ohio University to University of Kansas, and I had received a grant to record a CD. And I decided to put a few of the sonatas of Bruns on this CD, and also a few of the quartets. And at that point, I had been playing in an orchestra with George Sakakini for a number of years, and I think maybe we were in Columbus at that time. I don't think we had moved to Cleveland, but we were to the orchestra in Cleveland. But so I asked George if he would join, and he graciously, he agreed to do it. And I said, "Hey, you're in Oberlin, and I'm in Ohio a lot." I said, "What do you think about Barry Stees and John Sherwin joining?" And he said, "Oh, I think it'd be a great quartet." And so I didn't know Barry and John, actually. I didn't know them at all. I kind of cold called Barry. Now, I knew Barry a little bit because I took over for him at Interlochen, so I did know him that way. And I did a little guest teaching for him at Michigan State, so we had interacted. But at that point, we were just kind of colleagues in a loose way. Anyway, they agreed to do it, and it just began a wonderful friendship. And the group had no name. So we actually made this CD, and we hadn't even played a public concert. And we decided, we need to play a concert. And so we decided to put in an application or a proposal for an IDRS conference, which was in Tempe, Arizona, which you might remember. And and so we got approved to play in the concert or to play on the conference. And we didn't have a name. And so I said, "What are we going to call ourselves?" And And Barry, Steve said, "Well, we we do, we are the men who don't bite." And he was talking about our embouchures because we had
Yeah.
a lot of conversations, all of us as serious, serious pedagogues, and having, kind of serious and significant training from some of the most substantial teachers in our country, right? Um, Both from different lines of training, and so anyway, that kind of stuck, and it was catchy and kind of strange, and so that's how the name came about. Um, and so yeah, our favorite thing that we ever did was play in a hot dog bar in Cleveland, Ohio. You might know the name of that place. I don't remember, but
The name, no, Sundog Diner comes to mind, but maybe it's a different,
yeah, it was something
different
with a
one.
dog. Happy
Okay.
Dog, maybe. Happy Dog.
Uh-huh.
Um, anyway, yeah, that was a classical Revolution Cleveland gig that we did.
Uh-huh. Yes.
We just, it's been difficult, obviously, with the pandemic, and even before, we're four super busy people, and it's been, tricky to get together. But there's just something about the way in which we see resonance, and the way in which we, play the instrument, and our styles. I mean, the three of them studied all with the same teacher, and with David Van Hosen in a very short time span at Eastman, and they joked once that they should give me an honorary bachelor's degree to the Eastman School, because we just we just and we really enjoyed playing together, and just the sounds and the sonorities really
Mhm.
blended well. So anyway, it's a great span of time that I think back on.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love it's just, kind of jumping in with both feet, but then, you form this great friendship. And that's really all that I think we just love doing is just playing with our friends and sharing that. Are there any orchestra career highlights or concerts that you could share with us about?
Yeah, there are a few that probably jump to mind um, for people. Obviously, those who play in an orchestra full time would probably have too many to list, right? They just like could tick off a lot of them. My time in the orchestra was mainly in chamber orchestras, and so the treatment of the bassoon in works that can be played in an ensemble of 35, 40 people is a different thing. And obviously, as bassoon players, that's pretty magical. So um, yeah, one of them is, and I was thinking about this because we were there together. Was a set of concerts that we played, which had I can't remember what overtures, a Mozart over, or no, a Beethoven overture, maybe Egmont. I
Yes,
don't
I think it
remember.
was. Yeah.
And the fiddle concerto, the violin concerto of Mozart, which to this day is one of my favorite treatments of the bassoon in concerto repertoire. And so I just remember kind of a magical performance with this group in Cleveland, that we were both sitting there in the orchestra, and just so that, yeah, that comes to mind. I also think of I in the past have done a lot of work in Colombia. And there was a festival, a bassoon festival there, and I was so fortunate to play the Rossini concerto with the what's called the Sinfónica Nacional de Colombia, the National Symphony Orchestra of Colombia, and that was super fun because it's just a super fun piece, and it was a bunch of bassoon players, in the hall. Um, and then there's another piece. It's also with this group in Cleveland, but and whatever part I was playing, it wasn't even so significant in it, but this setting of the Peleas and Melisande of Sibelius, not Fauré, but Sibelius, like one of the most incredible sonic like pieces I've heard, and had heard in a long time. I didn't know the work actually much beforehand, but just really fell in love with it. And the use of the English horn in that piece just gives me goosebumps even when I think about it today. So
Mm,
those are a few, I would say.
love hearing about those. Yes. Eric, could you share any tips or advice on how to cope with music performance anxiety if that's something that you've experienced?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of what this means to people. And so as a performer, I have my own thoughts about it. As a teacher, I have my own thoughts. Obviously, they kind of coincide, at times. And so, for a lot of younger students, I actually have said often that we have to figure out how much of performance anxiety is just not being prepared. Like and I know this from my own standpoint. When I was younger, when I took auditions and I wasn't actually prepared, that creates anxiety, and that there's truth to that. And we have to own it, and we have to be fair with ourselves, because otherwise we're looking for all sorts of things, like eating bananas or taking Enderall or doing all sorts of things that might or might not fix the problem that we just aren't playing well in E major,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that I always say that first, because I think that's important to know, and to whatever extent that gets rid of the anxiety of performing. I think the word performing is really a super important one, because I think a lot of places where people get the most nervous or the most anxious is in auditions, and it's the word audition versus performing that kind of get separated, right? So I know the most successful auditions I had is where I felt like I was performing, and I was just presenting myself as a musician, and seeing if the you know the the style matched and all of that stuff. When it was an audition and I was couldn't get that out of my head, which I think a lot of young players can't. They get into that situation and it feels odd. I mean, it's not a normal kind of thing. And so I have found more people have kind of anxiety with that versus just getting on the stage and playing a recital, or playing a piece on a recital, or literally playing in the orchestra. So yeah, I guess the types of things that I think are most important are just being utterly prepared, and having been there and done that, right? So like preparing, whether it's some at least for students who are doing a recital, for example, sometimes there's endurance things that come around, and so I think a lot of that is stays in one's mind. And if you've never actually tried it out and like gone through your recital a week before and then taken a break and then go through it again, in the same evening or whatever it might be, that those things can help. But ultimately, when one can focus on the musical intent that you're wanting to share with, whether it's a committee or whether it's an audience, when you get to that point, there's not a lot of room for anxiety, right? You're just performing. Like if your brain is full with what you're doing and where you're going, and the map, you've had the whole plan in place. After years of Milda and years of scales and years of all those other things, I think to some extent the rest of it you can handle, right? Like butterflies or whatever people get, that your pulse raising a little bit, like those are normal things. I mean, it would be odd if people didn't have that happen and it just felt dead. That would be bad. I think we need to understand what it is. Like it's being nervous doesn't crash a performance, right? Like we should be able to handle that, but we have to work towards it.
Mm-hmm. Could you share just an overview of your reed making style and techniques?
Sure. I feel like the easiest way to describe it is I make an American style bassoon scrape. That's what I do. Now my bassoon scraping is definitely a hodgepodge of things. I learned how to make reeds at a camp in New Mexico from an oboe player, so that wasn't great. I loved working with my hands and working on cars and doing all that kinds of stuff. So I was really into it. But I remember when my mother moved out of the house that we grew up in, we went back to help, and there was a box there in my room that I grew up in, and it said Eric's Reeds.
Oh.
And I thought, oh my God, I don't remember this. So I opened up this box, and there must have been 100, 150 reeds in there. I don't think any of them were the same size or shape or had the wires in the same place.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, that explains a lot. So I struggled early on in my reed making career, and I would just ask a lot of questions to a lot of people, and it was really when I got to Cincinnati, and then a summer that I spent at the Music Academy of the West. At that point, studying with Dennis Michael, who introduced me to the kind of the properties and the principles of the what one would call the Hertzberg method, in terms of symmetry and balance and things like that. Not just like, oh, do this thing and it'll work, but actually the concepts of what it means for something to be symmetrical. That really lined up with my brain, and so things improved from there. I'm now, a proud owner of one of the last machines that was for sale, and so, but honestly, regardless of what profiler you have or what profile you use, as long as you understand where you're starting from and how to get to a symmetrical tip opening that will sustain what you want to do with it, you're going to be okay. And it ultimately is such that, at least in the States, of course, we're trying to allow the reed to resonate as much as it can. And not press it closed too much. Hence, the men who don't bite.
Yes. Eric, are there any important skills that you could share that we learned through music that apply to everyday life?
I think there are a lot. The struggle, of working through something on your own. It's very difficult for most people. Most people have to get used to that isolation
Mm,
and kind of disappointment. And it sounds. I'm a positive, optimistic person, so I don't. Those words, I don't like them very much, but they are. It is true. I mean, I think we have to go through this kind of trial and error thing.
mhm.
Uh, and that certainly helps, and whatever it might be, relationships, personal or in work relationships, or difficulties we have with a work environment, or with just life events that occur. And well, among all of that, I should say, we have to find ways to be kind to ourselves,
Mm.
and in the practice room, in the evaluation of the session. And that's where I worry, for my students, when I see them just giving themselves such a hard time, because it's really difficult. As you know, it's very difficult to move forward and to improve when your biggest critic is like in your brain the whole time. So
Yes.
I think, yeah, being kind to oneself and understanding that there are times where you have to set this thing aside, and you know it should be enjoyable to do what we do. There are times it's difficult, there are times it's hard, there are times we're struggling to learn a concept or a technique, but there has to be joy in what we do. And if that starts to leave the equation too soon, we have to help our students try to find that, if that's what's happening, or ourselves. We have to reevaluate and almost recalibrate, so that we can get into a better space, because it's just so much time by ourselves. I mean, even I don't practice as much now as I did when I was in my 20s, but still, there's all this time by ourselves. And if you're just constantly too tough on yourself, then obviously
Mhm.
yeah, it makes it really, really hard. So
Mm.
yes, be kind to yourself. Try to live by that as much as we can.
Mhm. And then, Eric, is there just any final advice you could share for musicians just starting out their music careers?
I think the word collaboration is one
Mm.
that I always come back to. I used to, in presenting things, in my administrative life, and I often come up with like three things. I don't know how it is, but I come up with three things, and and often communication is one of them. For a while I had the three C's. Uh, Collaboration, I should say, communication, and collegiality. Things like that. That are really important to be mindful of, and to work towards, because I think the collaborative spirit that one finds in chamber music, having spent so much time at chamber music festivals over my formative years as a musician, it really changed, I think, the way I operated, and so it's different than just practicing your concerti and practicing things. It's a much different vibe, and not everybody is that way, but I think that's certainly the way I am, and
Mhm.
the way I teach. So I think whether it's collaborating with other musicians, whether it's collaborating with other artists outside of music, or just collaborating with society or with your community, that we have to think about that, because it's otherwise the support net, like the safety net, is not built and not constructed well enough, and we all need to fall into that thing every once in a while. So we best tend to it and do what we can to strengthen it.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for this opportunity to interview you, and it's wonderful to get a glimpse into your life and career as a professional musician. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. I really appreciate the time.
For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for 2 events held every week on the Music Link. Every Thursday Central Daylight Time, a new YouTube video launches, and every Sunday Central Daylight Time is a live Zoom group discussion session with a new guest every week that you can register for on the website. Check out Eric's hosting session coming up this Sunday, where he's sharing about what it's like being the president of the International Double Reed Society, society's steps towards BIPOC and gender balance, exciting changes for the society in its 50th anniversary, reflections on celebrating 20 years teaching at the Interlochen Center for the Arts, and so much more. Find out more about Eric and his work at the University of Kansas School of Music's website and at interlochen.org. Please like, comment, and share any questions or feedback in the section below, and we'd be happy to incorporate these in the live discussion. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell for notifications, which really helps keep the Music Link moving forward. The Music Link is a New Zealand-based resource for people around the world to share, learn, and connect through music. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.